Good afternoon. Are we ready to roll? I think we're going. Okay, great. Welcome to our webinar for the Summer Stipend Program. We're here to tell you more about the program and to answer questions. The program is currently open and applications can be submitted at this point. This webinar, though, is designed to walk you through some of the highlights of the program and the application process. But first, I should introduce myself. I'm Beauty Bragg, a program officer in the Division of Research and a new lead for the Summer Stipends program. I've been at the NEH since January 2020. My background is in American literature, and I taught for many years at Georgia College and State University in Milledgeville, Georgia, before coming to the NEH. I'm joined today by Program Officer Dan Sack, who many of you know and have worked with, as he's the most recent lead for stipends, and also by Gwen Yates, our program analyst for Summer Stipends. Gwen and Dan, will be helping me collect and answer questions for this session. And we can, I think, move the slide forward. We should see an agenda slide. And so these are some of the items that we'll be talking about this afternoon. An overview of some of the key program details, eligibility requirements, our review criteria, and the contents of an application, where to find specific kinds of information. And as I'm talking, please feel free to type in questions. If you'll give me just a moment, I'm going to try to adjust that. I'm getting some blockage, some overlapping images. Excuse me. So, a few more words about our staff here at the NEH. Since the endowment is a federal agency, you may assume that the staff are all federal bureaucrats, and we are, but endowment staff have have faculty experience and strong research records. We see our job as supporting public and scholarly engagement with the humanities, and we do it because we believe in the importance of humanities scholarship. If you take away nothing else today, please know that unlike some foundations, NEH staff are happy to talk to you by phone or email. We want to be of assistance. Summer Stipends is one of the oldest programs at the NEH. It hasn't changed much in recent years, but there are a few shifts that you might want to know about. First, in past years, the program was governed by something we call guidelines. They are now called the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or sometimes we say NOFO. In general, it's the same information, it's just arranged a little bit differently. Second, you should know that the review criteria, the evaluation criteria have been revised a bit. And I'll come back to that a little later in today's presentation. The content is generally the same, but they're in a different order, so you should pay close attention to, but they're important, and you should pay close attention to the evaluation criteria. Number 3 The application packet requires an additional form, that is the project performance site location form, and that form is very straightforward. You just tell us where you're going to be doing what you're doing during the grant period. A fourth point we want to emphasize is our More Perfect Union initiative. As our nation approaches its 250th anniversary in 2026, the NEH is encouraging projects that promote a deeper understanding of American history and culture, and that advance civic education and knowledge of our core principles of government. The agency-wide A More Perfect Union initiative will help Americans better understand our principles of constitutional governance and democracy, and bring the perspective of the humanities to questions of racial justice, gender equality, the evolution of the American landscape, as well as America's place in the world. Projects are not required to respond to this initiative. Reviewers will not give you any boost if you do, nor will you be dinged or receive demerits if you don't. All applications will be evaluated on the usual criteria. So a word or two about the goals of the program. The goal of the program is to support understanding and to support outstanding and advanced humanities research in all disciplines and fields. These projects can be valuable to scholars, general readers, or both. The program supports projects at any stage of development, in early, middle, or late. But we do find that these small grants are most often useful at the early research stage or at the end of the writing process. A few important points about the program. These are 2-month grants. Mostly they're taken during the summer, but they not necessarily. The grant period must, though, be full-time and continuous. This year, the application deadline is September 22nd, with notifications sent in late March 2023. You could start your project as early as May 1st, 2023, and as late as September 1, 2023. I'm sorry, May 1st, 2022. I don't know why I jumped ahead in my numbering. I apologize. And I also advanced the notification date. So the dates on the slide are correct. Notification would come in March 2022 and with a May 1st, 2022 start date and or at earliest and a latest start date of September 2023. Over the last 5 years, the Summer Stipends program received an average of 827 applications and made an average of 81 awards per year, resulting in an average funding rate of 10%. Don't let these numbers discourage you. Even though it's a competitive program, you most certainly won't get a grant if you don't apply. If you don't get an award the first time around, we encourage you to apply and then reapply if necessary. I will note, though, that about 40% of awardees in the last 5 years were first-time applicants to the NEH. So, a word or two about what people do and what kinds of products they produce. People do what most scholars do, which is research and write. The most common outcome of a summer stipend is a book or monograph, but we are seeing other types of products as well, including ebooks and digital materials, as well as peer-reviewed articles. Translations and editions with critical apparatus are fully eligible in this program as well. So here we have a few recent books supported by summer stipends grants. These examples are meant to show the variety of projects that receive grants and to emphasize that we welcome projects on all topics related to the humanities. So, who should apply? The summer stipend program is, of course, as I've said, open to all disciplines in the humanities. And we invite scholars from those various disciplines from all institutions, and we especially welcome independent scholars and junior scholars, faculty from historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, as well as community colleges. So just briefly, a word about how we have historically defined the humanities, beginning from our founding legislation, which offers the examples listed here. The summer stipends is open to all disciplines in the humanities, but also to projects from the social sciences and from the sciences within a humanities method or employing a humanities method. We're also have broad scope in terms of eligibility. All U.S. citizens are eligible, as well as foreign nationals who've been living in the U.S. for the 3 years preceding the September 2021 deadline. Applicants to this program are not required to have an advanced degree. There's no institutional affiliation required. Even though it's important to note that even though you don't have to have an advanced degree to apply, you cannot be enrolled in a degree program at the time of application. For currently enrolled students, you may, if you've satisfied all the requirements of a degree and are simply awaiting conferral, you are eligible, but you must include a letter from the dean or a department chair in the conferring school to attest to your status for the application deadline, at the time of the application deadline. So we have one of the unique aspects of this program is that it requires nomination. Institutions typically institutions do run their own nomination processes and identify one person on their campus as a nominating official. Applicants will be required to include that person's name in their applications so that we can contact that person and confirm the nomination. And later in this presentation, I'll share a few suggestions for nominating officials. It is important to note, though, that a pretty large group of people are exempt from nomination in this program, and those include non-tenure track faculty, including adjuncts, non-faculty staff, community college faculty, emeritus faculty, and independent scholars. There are some kinds of projects that we do not support. There's a full list on page 14 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, but note that the list includes things like artistic projects, advocacy and policy work, teaching materials, empirical social science projects without humanities content, and dissertations. So, what would your application materials include, and how do you submit them? So applicants submit their own applications, even when nominated by their institutions. They submit the application packet through a portal called grants.gov, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes after I run through what is included in the packet application. The information about what you will be expected to include is found on pages 5 through 13 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The most important element of your application is the 3-page narrative, which again, I'll come back to. A second component that's required is your 1-page bibliography, which should demonstrate your knowledge of the field. Your evaluators will know that the bibliography is not comprehensive. The same goes for the 2-page resume. In the CV, you should focus on the items that are most relevant to your current project and best demonstrate your competencies for that work. Always remember to add your language skills as well. For some kinds of projects, you'll need a 1-page appendix, and these types include editions, translations, database projects, and visual materials. Other projects should not include an appendix. As I mentioned earlier, doctoral students who are awaiting the conferral of their degree will need to provide a letter from the dean or department chair confirming this status before the submission date, so that can be a component of the application. And another conditional piece is number 6. If you're delinquent on some form of federal debt, then you'll need to document your repayment status. In addition to these items, there are a few more things that will be required in your application. Brief summary of your project, and that summary will be less than 1,000 characters long. It's the first thing evaluators see, and we use it to help determine who should evaluate your application. A second component, or a second set of information that will be required are the names and email addresses of 2 people who will write your recommendation letters. Ideally, those recommenders should come from 2 different institutions outside of your own institution, and especially from people who know your project well. Missing letters won't make your project ineligible, but it is more helpful to have them. Letters will be due on October 15th. After you submit your application, your recommenders will get a prompt from us. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say after you submit. After the deadline, your recommenders will get a prompt from us about 10 days or so later, and then they will have 2 weeks to send the letters in. Finally, there's a note for you that the summer stipend award is a fixed amount, so there's no budget required as part of the application material. So I promised I'd come back to some of these elements. Thinking about your narrative. On page 10 of the funding guidelines or the funding opportunity, you will find an explanation of the parts that should be included in your narrative. First is the significance and contribution of your research. So here you tell us why the project is important. Second is the organization and methods of your project, or an explanation of how you will do it. Third is a work plan, what you'll do during the grant period and how it fits into the larger arc of your project. Fourth is a statement regarding your competencies, skills, and access for the project. So you should be attempting to let us know why you are the right person to do this work. And fifth and last is you should address the final product and plans for dissemination. And specifically, the question here is, how will your work reach its audience? We know it's a lot to do in only 3 pages, and remind you that applications that exceed page limits will be rejected from further consideration. But we also want to encourage you to recognize that it's completely possible to do this in that short space, and we refer you to some of the samples on our website. These are all successful applications, and they can give you an opportunity to see how someone else has successfully made a case for their project. So how is that application reviewed? Very closely according to the review criteria. So we urge you to keep these criteria in mind when you're working on your narrative. Your goal is, of course, to make a case for your project based on these criteria, and you should use them to structure your narrative. Think strategically. You can refer to the Notice of Funding Opportunity in section E1 to review these 5 criteria. That's also page 15 of the notice. But I'm going to walk through each one individually here. The first criterion is the most important. It tells us why your why your project is important. And that's what that portion of the narrative should do, tell us both what it's about and why it's important, specifically in terms of what it will contribute to your field, your specific field, and it needs to tell us that in a way that a generalist can understand. You should also situate your project in the broader context of humanities research and knowledge, as this will help us see the significance. Some questions that you can ask yourself as you think about making a case for your project's significance include, how will my project change the scholarship? Who needs to read this book and why? How will your work change how they understand the topic? And does this work tell us anything larger? The second criteria is a question is about what. It addresses the what of your project. So what you'll do during the grant period is a significant part of this question. And this component needs to explain to general readers what you'll do and convince them that the work will answer your research questions. It needs to be clear and organized. A well-written application is seen as a predictor of the quality of the planned publication. So a clear narrative is important. The third criteria is the feasibility and appropriateness of the plan of work, and this is really a question about how, or a criteria that assesses how your project works. You should provide a detailed work plan so that that's evident. Often we see descriptions of what will be accomplished from month to month. Be realistic about how much work you can get done during the grant period. Be specific. I'm going to work on chapter 5. I'm going to a specific archive. Think also about where you will be in the project when the award period starts, even though that will be 9 or more months from your application date. The fourth criteria is the quality or promise of quality of the applicant's work as an interpreter of the humanities, or the WHO. So here you want to tell us, why are you the perfect person for this project? Emphasize your strengths, exceptional language abilities that the project requires, or specific research skills that you have that make the project work. Evaluators will also look very closely at your CV to see your research and publication experience. They will also have the capacity to understand that people are at different stages in their careers will have different levels of experience. And so this is in fact why we have this language, both quality and promise of quality. The final criterion is about the likelihood of success. You need to convince your readers that you will be able to finish the project. This doesn't have to occur within the grant period necessarily, but it does need to be clear that it will be finished and that it will reach the audiences that you have identified. Evaluators will look at your publication record and referee letters to decide whether they have confidence in your ability to produce. So once you have all of these components together, what does the application process look like? So we asked, there's a requirement or the mechanism to submit the grant is through a portal called grants.gov. And when you get to that portal, in addition to the narrative, it will ask you to fill out a few other forms. Those requirements are described on pages 6 to 8 of the Notice of Funding Opportunity, but I will give you a little preview of what to expect. So the first form, the SF424 form, will ask you for several different pieces of information, including personal information like your name, phone number, email address, and mailing address, as well as the congressional district, which I believe it links you to a chart you can use to find that if you don't know it already. It will also ask you for some information about your project, the title of your project, and when naming your project, we ask you to keep in mind that if you do receive an award, that title will be available to the public. So we encourage you to make it something clear that the general public will understand. You'll also be asked for that project description I mentioned earlier of 1,000 characters. And so this is, you know, a succinct and sort of precise description of what the project does and what its expected outcome and intervention will be. You'll also need to enter the start and end dates of your project. And these run typically from their full months, so they run typically, say, from May 1 to June 30th, not to, say, July 1st, for instance, to count the months. You'll also need an electronic signature, or you'll provide an electronic signature. A second form that you'll be asked to complete is an NEH supplemental form, which will ask you some other for some other important pieces of information, including the field of the project. And here you can usually choose up to 3 fields. You will also provide a selection for the project director's field of study. And these are important pieces of information because they help us to choose what evaluators should review your application. So we're matching, we're attempting to match disciplines and bodies of knowledge. You will also be asked to put in your status, either senior or junior scholar. And junior scholar is defined as those who are 7 years or fewer beyond their terminal degree, and seniors 7 years and above. You'll also be asked to submit the names of the people who will be providing your reference letters, their email addresses, and institutional affiliations. Please do only enter one email address to help foster clear communication. You'll also need to, if you are tenured or tenure track, give us the name and email address of the nominating official on your campus who can confirm that you are nominated for this program. And as I mentioned before, we'll reach out to them for that confirmation. So a third piece of, document or a third set of information that you'll be asked to provide is the project performance site location form. And this is it's a new form. It's pretty simple. You just give the location or locations where your project activity will take place during the award period. So if you'll be partly working at home and partly working in an archive, you would include both of those locations. And then the attachments, the fourth component, the attachments form, is where you add your narrative, your bibliography, your CV, and any relevant appendices are required. So, one thing to remember about submitting your application is that you yourself have to submit it. Your institution cannot submit it even where you are nominated. You'll need to register with the grants.gov site, and since you would be applying as an individual, it's important that you make sure that your account has an individual applicant profile. If you don't select that individual applicant profile, you actually won't be able to move forward with your application, and all federal applications have to go through this grants.gov website. So that's a really important piece to remember. Another thing you might want to consider is that more than 50% of our applications are submitted on the deadline date, and sometimes that can cause the system to crash. So we do recommend that you submit about a week before, or at least a week before the deadline, to avoid any technical problems. If you do submit and you realize you made a mistake somewhere along the way and want to resubmit your application before the application due date, you are able to do that, and we will use your last validated online submission. If you have technical problems with the grants.gov website, we encourage you to call the grants.gov helpline. They are helpful, and we've listed the number here in the slide, and it's also available in the program guidelines. So I'm sure some of the volume of this information may be overwhelming. I apologize if it is, but I also encourage you to remember that there are lots of resources to help you as you work on your application, so you don't have to absorb it all right now. On our website, you'll find that the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO document, and that includes these detailed instructions on how to apply. You'll also find, as I've mentioned, there are some sample application narratives on the website. And again, these are successful applications, so they show you how other people have made a strong case for their projects. You can also find there a list of recently funded projects, which will give you a sense of the breadth of the kind of things that the program can fund. And there is a recorded webinar offering tips for writing a good application. So I mentioned earlier that tenured and tenure-track faculty must be nominated for this program, and that institutions can nominate up to 2 people. Each institution should have 1 designated person who can confirm the nominees for their faculty. Applicants will include that person's name in the application package, and we contact them in October to confirm the nomination. There's no letter required for this. It's just clicking a box in response to an email message that we will send. Institutions have the latitude to choose its nominees in whatever method that they prefer, but here I will give you some ideas about how some people do it. About 75% use a committee, either a standing committee or an ad hoc committee. Often those committees include previous grantees or panelists, and we'd be happy if you reach out to us to help you identify who has been a grantee or a panelist on your campus. Many of the processes use the program criteria as part of the on-campus or institutional selection process. And other institutions have found creative ways to encourage applications. And some of these ideas include things like organizing a mock review panel where participants evaluate a few of the sample applications from our website and demonstrate how the peer review process works. Some places encourage previously unsuccessful applicants to resubmit their applications. Other institutions have offered some recognition in annual reviews, while others offer internal funding for projects that are nominated but not funded by the NEH. So you can imitate any of these processes or innovate your own, we encourage you to think about the process and to send applications. So we're here I'm about to wrap up and open it up for questions, but I have some commonly asked questions here I'll go through in a moment. However, let me just say that remind you of how you can submit questions by going to the top right-hand corner of your screen and using the link for the Q&A box. You can type your questions in there and we'll answer as many as we can. And the we is those other, myself and those other staff members that I introduced at the beginning of this presentation. So while we're doing that, let me just address a couple of the frequently asked questions. Are dissertation revisions eligible? Yes, but projects based on dissertations need to be very careful and thorough about demonstrating how their projects move beyond the original dissertation. Can I apply with a collaborative project? And the answer there is yes, kind of. The Summer Stipends program is designed for individual applicants. So if you're working on a collaborative project, then each collaborator must submit an individual application. An award can't be divided between multiple collaborators. And the peer reviewers will evaluate each application on its own individual merits. Although it is still important that each application should explain how the work would be divided and the extent to which each collaborator's contribution depends on that of the other or others. Applicants who are seeking funding only for themselves, but who are working as part of a collaborative team are also eligible. And collaborating scholars who are affiliated with or sponsored by an eligible institution may in fact want to think about applying to the collaborative research program. Can you apply to NEH grant programs concurrently with the stipends program? Yes, you can. You can apply to most other NEH grant programs concurrently. And these include the Public Scholars Program, the Fellowships Program. But you can only hold one grant in a given federal fiscal year. So for instance, if you apply for a fellowship award and then for a summer stipend and you receive the fellowship, we'll withdraw your application for the stipend, knowing that you can only accept one award. And finally, who submits the application? Do you submit it or your college? And the answer is you. And we will communicate directly with you regarding that application. So you should use your preferred email there. And finally, we'll open it up to questions in the Q&A, where I will be assisted by my colleagues, Dan Sack and Gwen Yates.
Hi, Beauty. We have a few questions that came into the program box. Starting with, can you confirm that there's no advantage to applying with a project that responds to the more perfect union priorities? I think that's what I heard, but it surprises me.
Yes, I can confirm that. That is exactly what I said. The initiative is I guess from our side, and I'll let Dan respond to if he wants, but I think basically, I think it's safe to say that the initiative is, I mean, there is, of course, a philosophical component to it, but what makes it distinct is really that it's a budget initiative as well. And so we are emphasizing the same criteria, but it maybe expands our ability to support even more good projects.
That's quite right. Basically, you should write your best proposal and don't try to force it under that more perfect union umbrella. If it fits logically, that's great. If it does not, don't struggle because it does not get you extra credits if you do or demerits if you don't.
Thanks, Dan and Gwen.
What's next?
Okay. Can grants be used for media projects or to write treatments or scripts for media projects?
Yes, indeed. They can, but you really need to demonstrate in the application why it needs to be a media project and that you have the skills and experience and background to make a successful film. So this requires more than just talking about, as if you're writing a book, you really need to be able to talk about, I've done documentaries in the past, and this is how this is going to get produced.
Okay. How many who are awarded are writing peer-reviewed articles?
I don't have a percentage, but that is definitely it is definitely a recognized outcome of the program.
Yeah, I would say that the probably a good 80 to 90% of the applicants or grantees are proposing to write books. Maybe they might be doing an article along the way, but their ultimate product is a book. But that doesn't mean that articles aren't eligible, and you ought to talk about why writing an article is the right way to disseminate this product. And that's particularly appropriate in some fields like philosophy, for instance, where articles are very much a common means of dissemination.
Okay.
Thank you, Jen.
The next question is, did I understand correctly that the 2 letters of reference should be from outside of our home institution? In other words, no letters of reference from our own institution should be used?
Well, there's no ban on it, but we find that, I mean, I think it's helpful to you in establishing your own engagement with the discipline if you have recommenders from outside of your own university. So, what you're looking for there is someone who can speak to your project in the context of the larger disciplinary landscape. And, so to a certain extent that depends on moving out from your home department.
Okay, the next question is, could you please elaborate upon what material we need to address in the explanation of federal debt? What should that look like?
I'm gonna pass this one to Dan, but I will say I haven't seen the form, but it's a specific government form that you would complete. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and it's discussed in more detail in the notice of funding opportunity. It is actually very rare, and basically it's if you have outstanding unpaid taxes, or I think some student debt, and basically you say, yes, I have this other debt, but I'm in I'm in relationship with the IRS or whatever to pay it off. But as I say, it's really rare that this comes up in the application process. But do take a look at the notice of funding opportunities, and it describes there in a little more detail what's involved.
Thanks.
Okay, the next question for junior scholars choosing letter writers. How are letters from dissertation advisors, committee members viewed? Assuming that both could speak equally well to your ability to conduct the current project, is it better to have someone from your current institution, new department colleague, or committee, or from your committee?
For a junior scholar, I think it is completely appropriate to have your dissertation advisor write for you if they continue to be familiar with the work and can speak to how the work is evolving. And again, that question of what the work contributes or brings to the discipline, how it is important in the broader context of the discipline. So yes, I mean, it could very well make sense to have your dissertation advisor write for you. But again, in terms of thinking about that question of promise of quality or as a human interpreter of the humanities, I think panelists will also be looking for some indication of developing a kind of a broader platform and a broader audience for your work. So maybe thinking about maybe someone you've co-presented with at a conference who is clearly and solidly in your field and in a position to have a view of the broader landscape of your discipline. Do you want to add anything, Dan?
I think that's right. We have found that the most effective letters are ones that explain the importance of the project. So whoever can make the best case to say, I know the field, and this book's going to be really important for for the field in this way. And so whoever the person is who can do that is going to be your best letter writer, even if they are in your own institution or might be your advisor. That's the person you're looking for. So rather than someone who can say, oh, this person was a really great graduate student, what you really want is someone who can say, this is going to be a really important book.
Thanks.
Okay, could you please clarify how the evaluation criteria have changed from the previous years?
I am going to two things. I think it's already Dan's turn. We had agreed to alternate, but also given that my history is brief, I will let him answer this question. But basically, some of the changes are the inclusion of an additional form, as well as a renaming of some of the guidelines, and I'll let you speak to the rest, Dan, if you would.
Sure. The criteria are not significantly different. They've just been slightly reordered. It used to be that the second criterion was about the qualifications of the applicant. Now I think that's number 4. Number 2 is now about the quality of the research plan. So the criteria content is basically the same. They've just been slightly renumbered and reoriented.
Thanks.
Okay, who typically sits on the review panel, and how many review panels does a proposal go through?
Well, in this program, one, although there are some other programs that have a multiple review multiple panels of review. But in this program, again, one round of panel review. There are additional reviews by NEH staff that work collectively, and then there after the staff, there's an additional level of review by of recommended proposals by our national council. So it is a multi-stage review process, even if the peer review process might only be a singular process. And the other part of the question, I think, was about how the panels are constituted, who's on the panels. So we try to group the panels into, or we try to group the applications into panels that are arranged around disciplinary fields. And the panels are almost always have some level of interdisciplinarity to them, but we try to group, related fields and we try to put related fields together. I should just leave it there. And then we seek evaluators or panelists who will represent major macro disciplines, I guess I would say, most likely. And so we try to think about questions of expertise along disciplinary lines, maybe when we can, sort of thinking about a comprehensive historical span of expertise, or expertise on a historical span. But basically, these are your peers. We do, invite faculty from all across the nation. Their participation is totally voluntary. And so we try to organize those panels so that there is a good match between the applications in a panel and the experts who will be reviewing them, because we think that that's how to get the best and most accurate and beneficial to the applicant's reviews. Did I address all the parts of the question?
Yes.
Okay.
It's already 3:02, but how many more questions did you want to take? Because if not, they can go to the Stipends inbox and submit their questions there too.
Okay. Well, I don't want to run over time, but if there's nothing in there, if you don't see anything that needs to be addressed right now in this forum, yes, we'd be happy to receive additional questions at stipends@neh.gov, or you can email me directly. My email address is there in the slide, or questions that go to Gwen can go to Gwen as well. So we thank you for your participation this afternoon, and look forward to further communication with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan and Gwen.
You betcha.